So hi and good evening, everyone. We are very, very excited to see you. Welcome to Zooming into Shavuot. It's one of Shechta's programs for the holidays, and it brings new learning opportunities to the Jewish people. My name is Michal Makov-Peled, and I'm the Development Director at the Shechter Institute. And along with Karen Rosen, we will be acting as moderators and tech supporters for this evening session. And we're very excited and happy to start. We have very, very interesting lineup of sessions today. We're going to start with Midrashim about the giving of the Torah by Rabbi Prof David Golinkin. This is a pre-recorded session as Rabbi Golinkin now attending a wedding. We will continue with Dr. Shula Laderman about Ruth and Naomi in Jewish and Christian art. And then Professor Ari Ackerman is going to talk about Professor Mordechai Kaplan and Abraham Joshua Heschel on revolution. And we're going to end with Dr. Gila Vachman, who's going to talk about the kindness in the book of Ruth. Who was helping whom? Tonight's sessions will run for about 2 hours. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to send them to us in the chat so that our presenters can focus on teaching. And now, with no further ado, let's start with Rabbi Golinkin's pre-recorded session. I hope you enjoy and have a great evening.
Shalom. I'm sorry that I cannot be with you in person. As this is being broadcast, I'm at a wedding up north, and I've not yet found a way to be in 2 places at the same time. I would like to share with you some midrashim about Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. As you probably know, in the Bible, the Chag Shavuot, the holiday of Shavuot, is called Chag HaBikurim, the festival of the first fruits. Chazal, the rabbis of the Talmud, added the aspect of Chag Matan Toratenu, the holiday of the giving of our Torah. And of course, since then, Shavuot has had these 2 faces, these 2 aspects, the agricultural aspect and the aspect of the giving of the Torah. And therefore, in honor of Shavuot, as we zoom into Shavuot, I would like to teach some midrashim related to Matan Torah. And I will now share screen. And I selected these midrashim many years ago. The translations are my own from many years ago, though of course I was assisted by the classic Sansino translation of many of these midrashim and passages from the Talmud. You see the font at the top of the page. This is taken from a book that all of you should get to know, which is Sefer HaGadah, edited by Bialik and Ravnitsky over 100 years ago, around 1910. It has been reprinted innumerable times in Hebrew, and there is a wonderful English translation by Rabbi William Browder from about 30 years ago, also called Sefer HaGadah in English. The first midrash is found in Kohelet Rabbah, Ecclesiastes Rabbah, and Shir Hashirim Rabbah, Song of Songs Rabbah, and it is asking a question. Why did the children of Israel not receive the Torah at once? In other words, if the purpose of going out of Egypt was to receive the Torah, why not receive the Torah right away? Why wait all those days between Pesach and Shavuot? And Rabbi Yitzchak explains this based on a verse from Kohelet chapter 3, verse 11. Et hakol asa yafeh be'ito, that God does everything at its proper time. And this is what Rabbi Yitzchak said. Ru'yin hayu Yisrael b'shar sheyatzu miMitzrayim tinaten lahem haTorah miyad. That the Jewish people were worthwhile when they went out of Egypt, that they should receive the Torah at once. Ela amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but the Holy One, blessed be he, said, Adayin lo ba zivam shel banai. He said, they have not yet reached their bright looks, their bloom of health. Mishiabud tit ulevenim yatzu ve'en yicholim lekabel Torah miyad. They have just gone out from slavery of clay and from slavery of bricks, and they cannot receive the Torah at once. Mashal lema davar domeh. a parable. To what can this be compared? Lemelech she'amad beno mecholyo, to a king whose son is recovering from illness, and there are many, many hundreds of midrashim using a parable about a king and his son or his entourage. Ve'amar lo padgogo, the pedagogue, the teacher of the king says, Yelech bincha liskole shelo. He says, your son as well, he should go back to eskoli, he should go back to school. In Greek and in Latin, Amar adain lo bazivo shel bani ve'ata omer yelech bincha liskoli shelo. He says, the full bloom of health of my son has not yet returned, and you say he should return to school? Ela yitaden beni shnayim u'shlosha yirachim b'ma'achal u'v'mishteh v'yavri. He says, my son should recover for 2 or 3 months with food and with drink until he is totally healthy. Ve'achar kach yelech liskoli shelo. And then he shall go back to school. And now we have the nimshal, to what can this be compared? Kach amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so said God, Adain lo ba zivam shel banai. My sons are not yet in good health. Mishiabud tit ulevenim yatzau. They have gone out from the slavery of clay and bricks. Vani noten lahem et Torah, and I should give them the Torah at once. Ela yitadnu banai shnayim u'shlosha chodashim b'man u'be'er u'slav ve'achar kach ani noten lahem et Torah. Rather, they should be spoiled. They shall eat for 2 or 3 months the manna and the be'er, the spring of water, and the slav, the quail, and then I shall give them the Torah. So this beautiful midrash found in Kohelet Rabbah and Shir Hashirim Rabbah comes to explain why did the Jewish people not receive the Torah at once after the Exodus from Egypt, and it answers with this beautiful parable about the king and his son. They first had to recover physically before they could receive the Torah. I now skip to Midrash number 3 in my source sheet. And as you will see, this Midrash is in Aramaic. It's found in Shabbat Pechet Amud Aleph, Shabbat folio 88a, which is an entire few pages of Talmud which deal with Matan Torah. And the first phrase in this little story, in this little passage, is difficult to explain. Derashahu Glila'a ale de Rav Chisda. A certain Galilean drashed, made a drasha ale de Rav Chisda. And Rashi explains that Rav Chisda was sitting and the darshan is standing above him. And this was one of the methods of teaching in the Talmudic period. So according to Rashi, the teacher is sitting, the darshan is standing and repeating what Rav Chisda is saying. However, this is a bit problematic because many modern scholars say that Rav Chisda was never in the land of Israel. So how is the Galilean standing over him making a drasha? In any case, perhaps he was a wandering Galilean, which is found in another place in the Talmud, in Masechet Sanhedrin, Over Glila'a. So the actual realia of what this drasha is and how it's being given is not entirely clear. But the time frame is clear. Rav Chisda died in the year 308. So this story takes place around the year 300 of the Common Era. And the drasha itself is very clear and it's very clever. What did this darshan say? Brich Rachmana diyahav oryan tlitai la'am tlitai ayedei tlitai beyom tlitai beyarchat tlitai keman kerabanan. He said, blessed is God who gave the triple Torah, which is of course the Tanakh, Torah, Nevi'im, Tuvim, le'am tlitai, to the triple people, which is of course Kohanim, Leviim, Israelim, al yedei tlitai, by the third child, the third son, Moshe Rabbeinu, who was the third born, beyom tlitai, on the third day of Shloshet Yemei Hagbala, the 3 days of preparing for the receiving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, B'yarchat litai in the 3rd month, which is of course Sivan, and then Keman. Who does this follow? This follows Rabbanan, who said that the Torah was given on the 3rd day of Hagbalah and not on the 4th day of Hagbalah. So we have here a very clever drasha from around the year 300 of the Common Era, whether by a Galilean in Bavel or by a Galilean in the land of Israel, using the number 3 to very cleverly put together all these components of Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. The next 2 midrashim are really the exact opposites of each other from a theological point of view. The first one, number 4, which is taken from Shabbat Pechet Amud Aleph, Shabbat Folio 88a, it says that the Jews received the Torah at Mount Sinai because they had no choice. Either you observe the Torah or you die. And the second one, which is on the next page, says exactly the opposite, following the more dominant approach, which is that of Naaseh v'Nishma, that the Jews accepted the Torah because they wanted to accept the Torah. And in modern terminology, this is the difference between heteronomy and autonomy. Do we do the Torah because we are compelled to do the Torah, or we do the Torah because we want to do the Torah? And Professor Ephraim Elimelech Auerbach, in his classic work, Chazal, Pirkei, Emunot V'Dayot, The Sages, Their Beliefs and Opinions, the book has been published in both languages. In the Hebrew version, page 288, 289, Professor Auerbach stresses that the first approach here, which we're going to see in a moment, of Rab Avdimi Bar Chama Bar Chasa, this first approach, which says that we do the Torah because we were forced to do the Torah, is the minority opinion. Or as he puts it, the Rasha Zol Sharabi Avdime hi bechinat da'at yachid she'en lo chaver. This opinion of Rabbi Avdime is a lone opinion which has no friend, which has no common opinion. In other words, this is not the classic opinion in rabbinic literature. The classic opinion in rabbinic literature follows the Torah, Naaseh v'Nishma, that the Jewish people willingly accepted the Torah. So now let us see these 2 opinions. The first, as we said, is taken from Shabbat Folio 88a, and it's dealing with a textual problem. It says in Shmot chapter 19, verse 17, Vayityatzvu b'tachtit tahar, which can be translated that they stood at the foot of the mountain, but it can also be translated to mean that they stood underneath the mountain. And Rav Avdime Bar Chama, who lived in Bavel in the 2nd generation, right? So we're around 250 of the Common Era. Apparently Bar Chasa is simply a scribal error. Rav Avdime Bar Chama, Bavel, around the year 250, says, what can we learn from the fact that I take this verse to mean that they stood under the mountain? Melamed shekafa hakadosh baruch hu aleihem et hahar ki gigit. This teaches us that God held the mountain over them like a gigit. Now, we don't know exactly what a gigit looked like, but we do know that it was a very large vessel. And I have here a Xerox of Yoshua Brown's book, Klei Acheres B'Sifrut HaTalmud, Clay Vessels in Rabbinic Literature, a classic work on this subject, not a bestseller, originally published in 1953. And in his chapter on the Gigit, he brings another Talmudic source, which is taken from Sanhedrin, folio 77a, that if one person puts a Gigit on top of another, what is the law if that person is harmed or is killed? In other words, we see there from that passage in Sanhedrin that a Gigit was a huge clay vessel. And if you can imagine, it looks sort of like a mountain, right? At the bottom, it's wide. At the top, it's narrow. And Brand, in his book, Klei Acheres, compares these 2 passages. and says we can learn from the two passages that God is holding the mountain on top of the Jewish people as if he is holding a huge clay vessel on top of the Jewish people. Kigigit. Ve'amar lahem im atem mekablim haTorah mutav. If you accept the Torah, fine. Ve'im lav sham te'ei kvuratchem. And if not, there will be your place of burial. In other words, take it or leave it. Accept the Torah or die. This is the opinion of Rav Abdime Bar Chama, which is that we accepted the Torah because we had absolutely no choice in the matter. The exact opposite approach, which, as I said, is the dominant approach in rabbinic literature, is found in Sifrei Dvarim and in Mechilta B'Chodesh. These are two Tanaitic midrashim from the middle of the 2nd century. And Bialik and Ravnitsky, what they usually do is they merge the various versions of whatever midrash they are citing. And this midrash is based on a textual problem. Dvarim chapter 33, verse 2. And the verse here is shortened. The verse says, Vayomer Adonai misinai ba v'zarach miseir lamo. It says in Deuteronomy chapter 33 that God came from Sinai and he arose. Zarach is usually used for the sun rising, and he arose from the land of Seir. Well, Sinai and Seir are apparently not in the same place. So what does it mean that God came from Sinai, but he also arose from the place called Seir? And this is the midrash, which many of you may have heard, but may not know the source. Kishenigla hamakom litem Torah liYisrael, when God revealed himself to give the Torah to the Jewish people, lo Yisrael bilvad hu nigla, he did not reveal himself only to the Jewish people, ela al kol haumot, but rather to all the nations. Batchila halach etzel b'nei Esav. At the beginning, he went to the sons of Esau. And that's the connection here. Esav lived in Seir. Ve'amar lahem, and he said to them, Mekablim atem et Torah, do you accept the Torah? Amru lo ma katuv ba. The people of Seir, the sons of Esav, said, what does it say there? Amar lahem lo tirtzach. He said to them, you may not murder. Amru lefanav ribono shel olam. They said to him, Lord of the universe, kol atzmo shel oto avihem rotzeachu. The very essence of our father, of Esau, is to murder. And they quote the verse in parenthesis. This is Bialik and Ravnitsky. V'hayadayim yedei Esav, and the hands are the hands of Esau, meaning that he is a hunter, he's a murderer. V'lo ifticho aviv ela ala cherev, and his father promised that he would live by the sword. Again in parenthesis, V'al charbecha tichyeh. That is what Isaac said to Esau. Einanu yecholim lekabel et Torah. We cannot accept the Torah. That's chapter 1. Chapter 2. Halach lo etzel bnei Ammon u'Moav. He went to the sons of Ammon and Moab, and he said to them, Mekablim atem et Torah. Do you accept the Torah? Amru lo ma katuv ba. What does it say? Amar lehem lo tinaf. You shall not commit adultery. Amru lefanav ribono shel olam, Lord of the universe. Kol atzmam shel otam anashim einam ba'im ela miniyuf. Our very essence, we descend from adultery, which is not exactly true. But the story quoted here in parenthesis, Vatarena shtei benot Lot me'avihen, that the two daughters of Lot slept with their father. If you recall, after running away from Sodom and Amorah, which had been overturned, Einanu yecholim lekabel et Torah. So in other words, since the Ammonites and Moabites are descendants of an unholy union, therefore we cannot accept the Torah. Halach lo etzel b'nei Yisrael, the 3rd chapter. To the sons of Ishmael, Amar lahem mekablim atem et Torah. Do you accept the Torah? Amru lo ma katuv ba. What does it say? Amar lahem lo tignov. You shall not steal. Amru lefanav. They said to him, Ribono shel olam, Lord of the universe, kol atzmam shel otam anashim einam chayim ela min hagneva u'min hagazel. Those people, their essence is that they live from stealing. And again, this is based on a biblical verse, which is here in parenthesis, Pera Adam Yado Bako Vayad Kolbo, that it says in Genesis about Yishmael that he will be a wild man his hand will be in everything, and everything will be in his hand. In other words, he lives by stealing. In other words, those are the three attempts by God to give the Torah to other peoples. There is no nation to which God did not go and knock on the door, if they want to accept the Torah. And then he went to the Jewish people. The final chapter, chapter 4, Amrulo, Na'aseh v'nishma. They said, we shall do and we shall listen. Zeu shene'amar, this comes to explain the verse in Dvarim that we started with. Adonai misinai ba, v'zarach miseir lamo, hofia mehar paran ve'ata merivivot kodesh, mimino eshtat lamo. That God came from Sinai, and he arose from Seir. He appeared from Har Paran, and he came from Rivivot Kodesh. From his right hand is fire. So we see here from this very elaborate midrash that on the one hand, it comes to explain the difficult verse from Deuteronomy, why it says that God came both from Sinai and from Seir. On the other hand, it gives the message that the Jewish people accepted the Torah willingly, which is very different from the opinion of Rav Avdime Bar Chama in Masechet Shabbat, that we accepted the Torah because we had no choice. The next midrash we shall deal with, number 6, is found in Breshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, and it too deals with a textual problem. And the text here being discussed is Tehillim, Psalm 68. And as some of you may know, the story of the Exodus from Egypt does not only appear in the book of Shmot, it appears in a number of other places in the Bible. And one of those places is Psalm 68, which retells the story of the Exodus from Egypt. And in that psalm, we have verse 17, Lama teratzdun harim gadnunim. I'll use here the English translation of Sansino. Why look ye askance, ye mountains of peaks? I apologize for the Old English, but the Sansino translation of Breshit Rabbah is from the 1930s and was done in England. So there are many ye's and yo's and thou's and shalt not. So what is the difficulty in the verse? Lama tiratzdun harim gavnunin. The word gavnunim is difficult, and the word tiratzdun is difficult. So this is Rabbi Yossi Aglili's explanation. And for those of you who know both Hebrew and English, they're not entirely the same. I believe that Bialik and Ravnitsky here shorten the passage. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, B'sha'ah sheba HaKadosh Baruch Hu liten Torah b'Sinai, when God, the Holy One, blessed be He, came to give the Torah at Mount Sinai, hayu heharim ratzim umedainim elu im elu. The mountains came, they ran, and they were arguing with each other. And this is a very clever explanation of the word tiratzdun, which is a difficult word. And what Chazal do, what the sages do when they arrive at a difficult word that they can't understand, is they explain it by notarikon. Notarikon, which is of course a word in Greek, means to divide the word in two or sometimes in three. And they say tiratzdun. Tiratz means ratzim, to run. Dun means middainim, to argue. And therefore, the harim, the mountains here, are running and arguing one with another. And what are they saying? Ze omer, alaya Torah nitenet. Ze omer, alaya Torah nitenet. The first one says the Torah should be given on me. And the second one says, no, the Torah should be given on me. Tavor ba mi bet Elim, the Carmel me'aspamia. It says Mount Tabor, which is a beautiful mountain in the lower Galilee, comes from Beit Elim, and Carmel comes from Aspamia. And Aspamia, as some of you may know, is apparently Spain. It sounds like Hispania, Aspamia, Spain. And Spain To say Spain in the biblical and rabbinic periods is to say the end of the world. Beit Elim may mean Olympus, the house of the gods. In other words, Har Tavor comes from Olympus. The Carmel comes all the way from Spain. And Ze Omer Anini Kreti. One says, I was called to have the Torah given upon me. Ze Omer Anini Kreti. And the other one says, no, I was called to have the Torah given upon me. Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Lama Teratztun Harim Gavnunim. Or perhaps with greater force, Lama Teratztun Harim Gavnunim. Why do you run and argue with each other, you mountains with humps? Kulchem Harim Ela Kulchem Gavnunim. You are all mountains, but you all have humps. And they're learning this from the word giben. A giben in biblical and modern Hebrew is a humped back person, a person with a flaw, and in this case, a mountain with the flaw. What is the flaw of these other mountains? Kulchem ne'esta avodah zara al rashechem. All of you other mountains that want to have the Torah given upon you, all of you were used for avodah zara, for idol worship. Aval Sinai, shelo ne'esta avodah zara alav. But Mount Sinai, which did not have idol worship done upon it, that is Hahar Hamad Elohim L'Shivto. That is the mountain which God wanted to use as his resting place. In other words, they took this difficult verse from Psalms, which is a difficult verse. The context there was the Exodus from Egypt. And they said this verse is talking about the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. And it means that all of the mountains ran and argued with each other and said, Alai haTorah nitenet, the Torah should be given on me. And the other one says, no, Alai haTorah nitenet, the Torah should be given on me. But God says, no, all of you mountains are harim gavnunim. All of you are mountains with a hunchback. All of you are mountains with a defect. Your defect is that idol worship was done upon you. But Mount Sinai, no idol worship was done there. It is a pure mountain. And that is why I have chosen Mount Sinai for Matan Torah. We will do one last midrash in the time remaining. And this is, again, a famous midrash taken from Bamidbar Rabbah, which is a midrash which, according to Professor Hanan Elmak, was edited primarily in the medieval period, apparently in Provence, in southern France, in the 12th century. And this is coming to explain a verse in Mishlei in Proverbs chapter 29. And from this, we learn a moral lesson about Matan Torah, or a moral lesson in general. And the Midrash says, Davar Acher, another way of explaining the verse from Proverbs, Ga'avat Adam Tashpilenu, that a person's pride shall bring him low. Zet Tavor v'Carmel, these are the mountains of Tavor and Carmel, which we mentioned a moment ago in Breshit Rabbah. Shebao misof ha'olam, who came from the ends of the earth, mitga'im nomar, saying, she'anu gvohim, that we are tall, ve'aleinu HaKadosh Baruch Hu notenet HaTorah, and therefore God will give the Torah upon us. In other words, they say, we're the highest, we're the nicest mountains, give the Torah upon us. Ushva ruach hitmot kavod. The end of the verse says, but a humble person, he is the one who will acquire honor. Says Sinai, that is Mount Sinai. Sheishpilat atzmo lomar she'ani namuch, who said, I am a lowly mountain. Ve'ayedei kach tamach HaKadosh Baruch Hu kvodo alav, v'nitna alav HaTorah, v'zacha lechol hakavod hazeh. Because Mount Sinai said, I am a lowly mountain, I am a low mountain, not a tall mountain. That is why God chose Mount Sinai to give the Torah upon it. And it merited all of this honor. Tema, as it is written, Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai, and God descended to Mount Sinai. So apparently the textual basis for this midrash was, why does it say Vayered Hashem al Har Sinai? If it was a tall mountain, it might have said, Vayaleh Hashem el Har Sinai. But God descended to Mount Sinai to emphasize the lowliness of the mountain. Because Mount Sinai was lowly, was humble, that is why God chose Mount Sinai to give the Torah upon it. And this relates to other passages in rabbinic literature, says that a person who runs after honor will not achieve honor. A person who runs away from honor will be honored. And of course, here we're not talking about a person, but about mountains, but it's the same message. The tall mountains, the beautiful mountains, Tabor and Carmel, said, give the Torah upon us because we are tall and lofty. And God chose Dafka, specifically the lowly mountain, because it was lowly. These are just some of the Midrashim about Matan Torah, about the giving of the Torah. And I wish all of you a very happy Chag Shavuot, Chag Sameach. I hope that you will learn these Midrashim and others as you stay up all night learning at a Tikkun Leil Shavuot, at a Tikkun on the holiday of Shavuot. Chag Sameach.
Thanks so much for the session by Rabbi Golinkin. It was fascinating as always. And whoever wanted, we attached the source sheet in the chat. And now with no further ado, Dr. Shula Laderman, who will talk about Ruth and Naomi in Jewish, Israeli, and Christian art. Thank you, Shulamit. You are on mute. Dr. Laderman, you are on mute.
Okay, now I'm going to unmute. Okay. As you see here in my cover page, there will be many pictures that we'll deal with and learn things from them. I would like to show you that if we really look at the book of Ruth, we don't really know much about Ruth. We don't know, like it doesn't say that she was beautiful, like it says about Sarah or Rachel. We seem to know very little about her appearance or about her nature. Yet soon we learn to appreciate her kindness, her devotion to her mother-in-law, and her willingness to accept a new religion, as well as to assume a responsibility for Naomi's livelihood. At the same time, we don't know much about Naomi either. We seem to know very little about her life as well, besides some of the tragedies and also her decision to return to Bethlehem as a defeated and destitute person. That's all we know. So let us examine Jewish, Christian, Israeli, and general works of art and learn from them how artists were able to fill in many of the missing details and thus add a magical touch to this most gracious and beautiful story of Ruth. I also want to thank Dr. Joe Milgram and the wonderful collection of visual Midrash of Tali Educational Fund that is a pleasure to use, and you're all invited to do so. The first scene, the family is leaving Bethlehem. Here we have a woodcut of Jacob Steinhardt. He was originally from Germany, and then he came to Israel, lived from the end of the 19th century into the 20th. And he is showing us here the family of Naomi leaving Bethlehem. Here we see them walking out of the gates of Bethlehem. We have another very nice picture. I just would eliminate this. Okay, a very nice one of Ze'ev Rabban. Ze'ev Rabban, also an artist that came to Israel and taught at Bezalel School. And this one is a picture that he did on the skull and the family leaving Bethlehem. And if you look at it carefully, we can see here, we see the picture of Naomi on a donkey, all laden with all their things, because apparently they were a well-to-do family. And she looks kind of very gloom, and they're walking. And in the background, we see the two sons investigating the area. And we can also see a dead camel here on the floor, and all these birds above this corpse, meaning that the situation is very bad, and that's why they're leaving. And she is a woman, but she has 3 men, her husband, and the 2 sons that are living. And it's very gloomy to see this kind of departure, that they are looking kind of all of them very sad. Here we have a very interesting picture that I was amazed to see. Salvador Dali, 1967. He calls it Biblica Sacra Familia Ruth Moabitis. And if you see here, it's a weird picture. 3 faceless figures are seen in the center of this lithograph. 2 seated are crouching under a tree, and 1 standing. They are wearing hooded robes, 2 gray and 1 yellow, and another 4th figure is seen in the back over here. You can see it in the back, and drawn and in black, and it's very strange. What are they doing and who are they? But all we know is that he gave the title, The Family of Ruth the Moabite. So that's another picture. And then we have this amazing picture this is from the 13th century. It's called the Bible of St. John of Acre. It's from Acre, and it was a Bibliothèque Nationale. It's now in a different library, but you can see we have here an entire picture divided into 6, and it tells the story of Ruth. And you read it from left to right. It's a Latin manuscript, left to right and top to bottom. And the story is from the Crusader period. And it's very interesting why they made such a extended picture here from the story. And then we could see that basically they want to emphasize different things. One of them is the fact that the story of Ruth is very important in Christianity, because they view this book as the lineage of Ruth to Jesus. Ruth marries Boaz and becomes the grandmother of Jesse, and the great-grandmother of David, and later of Jesus, who is, according to Christian interpretation, prophesied to be the Messiah, as you could see in Isaiah, that they interpret their way. And there shall come forth a shoot out of the stock of Jesse, meaning Ishai, Choter Ishai, and a twig shall grow forth out of his roots. So we regard Ruth as Em HaMalchut, she is the grandmother of the King David, but a great grandmother. But here for the Christianity, she's a very important figure, because from her comes Jesus. And there are many pictures later in the medieval time where you could see like a tree, and you could see Jesse on the bottom, and then all the generation leading to Jesus. Second scene, that was first scene, the departure. Naomi, after Elimelech's death, is marrying off her 2 sons to 2 Moabite women, and both sons die. So in the picture here, the next picture, we can see here after we saw the family leave, she and her husband and the 2 sons. Now the husband is died, and here she is with the 2 sons and their Moabite women. Now, there's a very interesting thing, a feminist companion to the Bible, and there it says that the book of Ruth is a feminist commentary on the Torah. And what's the commentary? The book is called The Scroll of Ruth and not of Boaz, because it's related to the female experience. The first verse of the book introduces a woman together with 3 men who are leaving Bethlehem because of the famine, as you see here in the first picture. The wife is characterized as Elimelech's wife. But soon the story that began with Naomi and 3 men, her husband and her 2 sons, turns to a story of Naomi, a widow of Elimelech, and 2 other women who are the widows of her 2 deceased sons. So the next thing that happens, and you see that's the next picture that we have in that Crusaders painting, Naomi realizes that she cannot care for the two young women. She wants to send both back home. She defines the women's home from a female point of view. Contrary to the expression, go to your father's house, she says, go return each of you to your mother's house, to her mother's house, and Lord, deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. So look at the picture. Here is, this is Naomi, and she is telling them to go. And this one is Orpah, the one daughter-in-law who is turning away. And here is Ruth, and she's motioning something very interesting. The hands in the middle, in medieval times, starting from Byzantine unto medieval art, the hands really converse. They tell us things. So if we look at the hands here, we can see that what the Pasukim say, and I'll let you read the Pasukim, when she says, Ruth says to her, entreat me not to leave thee and to return from following you. And then she says, well, whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. And her hand turning up to the top is when she says, thy God is my God. And then, therefore, she decides that she's going to go with her, and she will be with her until both of them die. So you could see something very interesting. Those motion with the hand points to God. We have this manuscript. We don't have many paintings, Jewish paintings on the book of Ruth. This is one of them, which is taken from the tripartite machzor of 3 parts that has one for the high holidays, one for Pesach and Shavuot, and it's from South Germany, 1320. And it's very interesting because you could see that we have hybrid images. We have bodies and heads of animals on top. And the word, this is the word Vayehi bimei shvot hashoftim. That's the first word of the book of Ruth, and that's called an opening word, because we can't do initial. We don't separate letters. We separate the words. So here is this picture, and if you notice, I'm pointing to you out here. This is Ruth, and look at the hands. Just like she points to the heaven here she points also with her 2 hands. She is going to be with Naomi and accept her God. And that's what she's pointing to by raising her hand. Now the departure, that's the next thing. I brought you here a beautiful painting by Marc Chagall. And he drew quite a number of series of biblical pictures. This one is from 1958 to 1960, color lithograph. And he said, since my early youth, I have been fascinated by the Bible. It has always seemed to me still that it is the greatest source of poetry of all times. Since then, I have sought this reflection in my life and in art. The Bible is like an echo of nature, and this is the secret I have tried to transmit. So you could see the beautiful picture that he draws here, and obviously this is Naomi and her 2 daughters-in-law, and Naomi stands flanked by her daughters-in-law, Ruth and Orpah. The 3 of them stand on a background of vegetation while a red sun hangs low in the sky, and a small lamb down here stands on the left, meaning he shows them in nature, and he shows them like they are about to part, but they still want to be together and part of the nature around them. This is a beautiful one. This one is, and again, this is not Jewish. This is William Blake. William Blake was a poet and a painter in the 18th century. This painting is from 1795, and it's titled Ruth, entreating Ruth and Orpah to return to the land of Moab. And look at them, the two of them wearing white. And again, the background is nature. And she's raising her hand and saying, I have nothing to give you. I can't take you, and I cannot promise you anything. And yet Orpah, even though she's very sad, she's about to leave, but but Ruth is hugging her, and she's not willing to leave. Then we have again Jacob Steinhardt, who also does a woodcut here. And look at the way he shows the love between Ruth and Naomi. And it's very interesting because the verse that says in Ruth 1:14, and they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth cleaved unto her. The word cleaved is a very interesting word. We have it in Bereshit. In Genesis 2, it says, therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. But here it shows that there was great love. It's not a sexual love, but it's a real contact that he wanted to show as the essence of the book of Ruth. Now, we have a few more paintings that I think beautiful. Gustave Doré is a non-Jewish painter from the 19th century. And again, he shows Ruth hugging Naomi and Orpah leaving. She's on her way out. And again, we see Ruth and Naomi, and we see Orpah leaving in the background. This one is really very touching. Again, that cleaving that you have here. This is a painting Calderon from 1886, and describing Orpah who is leaving and Ruth who is not willing to leave and is wanting, you see the cactus in the background, she's willing to go with her wherever she's going. Now, the next thing is this very sad thing that the scroll says, is this Naomi? What are we talking about? We are talking about Naomi coming back to Bethlehem. And what you see here, this is a picture called Morgan Bible. It's from the 13th century. It's in the Morgan Library, and that's why it's called. And you read it from left to right. Here is Naomi wanting to part from her daughters-in-law, and here is Ruth who does not want to leave, and here they come to Bethlehem. And what it says in the pasuk, the two went until they came to Bethlehem, and it came to pass when they were coming to Bethlehem that all the city was astir concerning them, and the women said, is this Naomi? Here is this beautiful woman rich woman, maybe she wasn't beautiful, she was rich, left and, to look for America or something like we say. And here she's coming destitute with nobody, and they ignore Ruth altogether. And we have the same scene here, a picture that's done by James Tissot, who is an Orientalist. He's from the 19th century, and Orientalism was the thing showing people as they looked in our part of the country, of the land, of the world. And here you could see Naomi coming to the well. That's where all the women are in the biblical time. And here is Ruth behind her. Nobody notices Ruth, but here she's greeting them, and they say this, she's returning. She has a donkey, but she's raising her hand, yet the women kind of stand and watch her, and this thing that they say, this Naomi, that's what she looks like. And the same we have here again, Zev Rabban, showing the return, and we see the two of them. Here is Naomi with she has a staff to help her walk, and she has the very little things that she could bring with her. And she's walking with Ruth, and everybody's looking her in really dismay. This is what she is now, and this is what the whole, and it's a very sad way to greet her, because then she feels that the people are saying to her, do not don't call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. So you could see the sadness that we have with her coming back. And then we see the next thing, that basically we have here Ruth, who is taking initiative, and she's going to go and glean in the fields. And you could see that here Boaz notices her, and he asks his servant, who is this girl? And this leads us to the next question. What is so attractive about Ruth? As I said, in the book, it says nothing about her looks. It doesn't say she was beautiful or anything, but something attracts people to her. And here you could see something very interesting. If we look at the beginning of the 20th century, at Israeli artists at the time, Ephraim Lillian, who came from Russia but taught in Bezalel, he is showing us now Ruth like a picture of the new Israeli agricultural girl. She's a pioneer who immigrated to Israel from a new model of Jewish woman, and you could see her with all the many, the wheat that she gathered, and something standing very proudly. And yet we know that she was not there to get as much as she can, because there were very strict rules about what you could gather in the field. You go behind the workers and you just pick up the few things that were left behind. And here, when you want Doreh, who's not Jewish but follows the text and apparently some of the sources, and he's showing Boaz asking the servant, who is this girl? Because you see she has this very modest and lowly kind of way of picking up just few of the wheat. So if we follow the Talmud in Masechet Shabbat, there is a thing that says, then said Boaz unto his servant that was set over over the reapers, whose damsel, who is this damsel? And was it Boaz practice to inquire about every workers that every poor person who was coming to gather? So says Rabbi Eliezer, he perceived a wise dealing in her behavior. 2 ears of corn she gleaned, 3 ears of corn she did not glean. It was thought he perceived modest behavior in her. The standing ears she gleaned, standing the fallen she didn't, meaning she had a way of doing it. And it's very interesting that not only he does it, and Rabban also shows her very modestly bending down and picking the wheat that is left behind. But the interesting thing is what I show you here. This is an octatec. Octatec is a Byzantine manuscript from the 11, we have several copies, 6 copies, 11, 12, and 13th century. And what you see here, the text is in Septuagint, in the Targum HaShiv'im, and we have pictures on the margin. And he is also noticing that she's very careful at picking up just things that were left behind. And we see it in several of this Byzantine. Why is it an octatec? We know about the Pentateuch, 5 books, and the octatexts were 5 books, the book of Joshua, the book of Judges, and then the book of Ruth, because that shows the lineage of Jesus from Moses to Joshua, to the Judges, and when that happened. And this is another interesting, this is French realism. In the 19th century, we have the Industrial Revolution, and you see here that there is a lot of big piles of wheat, but the women very, just bending down and trying to grab or to pick up the few things that were left behind. And they are bending down. Notice the way they're bending down. If you compare them, and here is another James Tissot, that she is watching. You don't just pick up everything. You have to see that you are in the end of the field. Pe'ah. Pe'ah is the border of the field. Just then you're allowed to pick up. And so the feeling is that here, Reuben, in his painting, Ruth, he shows her with a lot of wheat. But we saw that basically the point they wanted to emphasize was her modesty and her bending down in a very modest way, and doing what the social rules of Judaism is allowing her. And now we come to the plan of Naomi and Ruth's performance. Naomi is a very smart woman, very wise. And here you could see her, she's older, and here is Ruth next to her, and she's pointing out she has a plan. And her plan, in this is Jan Victor's from 17th century, and you could see that she is giving Ruth the ideas of what to do to catch Boaz, so that she could rely on the fact that the attention he gave her will be translated into something practical. So here is the plan that she tells her to dress up beautifully and to go down and when after he ate, and to wait and see what he would do. Now, we don't know from the way it's explained what exactly was she to do. She was to come near him, but what exactly did she do is not very clear. Now, here I bring you a very interesting, also 13th century a manuscript, not Jewish, where it shows here is the images of the people reaping and her bending down to get just few things, and Boaz noticing her. And the bottom one, here it is. Look at this. This is when she crawls to see by his feet, Boaz's feet, and he is waking up and pointing his finger at her, and she's all shook up. Now, we don't know exactly what the artist wanted to convey here, but if we look at other pictures that describe how she went into the threshing floor and she found him sleeping, and she crawls under his garment to his feet, meaning we don't know exactly what, but it sounds something mysterious. And here you could see it. And it came to pass at midnight that the man was startled and turned himself, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. We have it in the Padua Bible from 1400. Here she crawls into his bed, and then he wakes up and he's all shook up. Now you could see that the artists used different ways to try and describe and guess what it was like, that scene, what did it look like? And this one is back to that Crusader painting that showed the different pictures. So here you have the way she's crawling down. We back to Chagall, and Chagall does it again in nature, and he leaves us the guess what exactly is happening. Here he's sleeping and she's crawling, and it's not quite sure what is being done, but she is supposed to wait, according to her mother-in-law, to wait and see what he will do. But she doesn't wait, and she asks him to, she right away suggests what should be done, and that he should put his garment over her, meaning he should take responsibility. She definitely progresses this idea. Now, we're back to this trepta, to the machzor, and you could see what we saw here and the way they were weeping. Here is what we will see, the gift that Boaz gave her in order to take to her mother-in-law. And in the Padua Bible, we see the text says she should give her kerchief, and he put wheat for her to take to her mother-in-law. And you see how this is the Padua of 1400, this is 1300, and the way these hybrid characters portray the same text in visually. The redeeming, now we're ending the story, the redeeming, the confirming by drawing off the shoe, and marriage and the birth. So here we have Boaz, who already after what Ruth suggested and her assertiveness, he gathers the people, and the next in kin takes Helfi's shoe, because he decides, here they all have Jewish hats, and he is saying to him, if you are the next of kin and you want to get the fields, you have to marry the woman as well. And he doesn't want to, so he's drawing his shoe, and with that he's coming out of this obligation in order that Boaz can take her for a wife. And here we have this Boaz marrying Ruth, and she bore a son. And here we can see the picture in the Morgan Bible of her giving birth to the son, but who gets the son? Naomi. Naomi, there is a son born to Naomi. It's like she got to have a son from this wonderful daughter-in-law who was willing to do everything for her. And the women now are different, they sing a different song. And here you can see this beautiful Solomon painting of Ruth and Naomi, where Naomi is holding the baby. And the end of the story, let us review, coming to this end, few corrections that are made in the story. The Scroll of Ruth begins with Naomi's family leaving Bethlehem because of the famine. They went to Moab, where the Moabite apparently enabled them to live and to sustain themselves for 10 years. Upon Naomi's return to Bethlehem, it was Ruth, the Moabite daughter-in-law, who brought Naomi food and saved her from starvation, meaning that the reason why we were not allowed to marry, Jews are not allowed, Israelites, to mingle with the Moabites, is because they did not give bread and water to the Israelites when they came out of Egypt. That's one correction, that here she reprimanded. And another correction to do with the attitude of the women of Bethlehem, who showed malicious delight upon seeing Naomi returning so poor and destitute, and also totally ignore the presence of Ruth. Now, at the conclusion of the story, they are saying to Naomi, for thy daughter-in-law who loves thee, who is better than 7 sons, meaning they now appreciate the Ruth and appreciate what happened to Naomi, and thus, in a way, her Ruth's deeds reprimanded for the sin of the Moabite, and also reprimanded, meaning brought joy and happiness. And the women realize now the treasure that and how blessed Naomi is. And to end with this one, Thomas Matthew Rook, from the end of the 19th century, you can see 3 pictures here. Ruth is not leaving her. This is Boaz noticing her. And here she is giving birth and giving the baby to Naomi to take care. The clear message of this beautiful story is that women, when they join forces, help and strengthen each other, could overcome the most difficult situation, even in a strong patriarchal culture.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laderman. And I couldn't agree more with this very beautiful and strong message. And I hope that it will carry on. And quickly, I'm moving forward to Professor Ari Ackerman. And first, I want to congratulate Ari on this opportunity for becoming a professor just this past week. So congratulations. We're very excited and very proud of you. And I don't want to take any more of your time, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Michal, for that introduction. In my talk, I'm going to be dealing with a question that's obviously very related to Chag Shavuot, and that is the question of how we view the event of revelation at Sinai. And this has become one of the most disputed and contentious issues in modern Jewish theology. In other words, can we accept the facticity of the revelation at Sinai? Can we accept the traditional belief of Torah min hashamayim, that God directly revealed the words of the Torah to Moses, Moses transcribed them, and that is the process that produced our Torah? Or is this a problematic belief? Do we have to shift it? Do we have to change it? Do we have to understand it differently? And this debate, to a large degree, puts different Jewish thinkers in different denominations and different camps. It's very much a foundational issue in modern Jewish thought. And I want to look at two thinkers, Mordechai Kaplan and a little more expansively, Avram Yoshua Heschel. Both wrote about this issue extensively, and it was central to their thought. But first, I want to try to understand why it's become a problematic issue. I also want to emphasize that if something's not clear, if you want to contribute something, feel free to write in the chat, and I will stop periodically if I see there are any contributions in the chat and try to address them. So now let's try to understand why this whole issue of revelation in general, I would say, God revealing himself to human beings, and even more particularly, the revelation at Sinai has become problematized in modern Jewish thought. And I'll point to two issues that are especially prominent in this debate. The first has to do with the theology, the conception of God that we have that furnishes a literal understanding of Torah min hashamayim. And that's the idea that there's a personal God. God addresses human beings. He's concerned about human beings. He interacts with human beings. And as a result of the impact of modern thought and culture and philosophy, it's become difficult for us to accept this conception of God, this idea that a divine entity actually speaks to human beings. It's understood as something supernatural, even mythic, anti-scientific, that requires this leap of faith against our rational beliefs. And according to this understanding, our modern belief commitments force us to accept a conception of God in which God is far more transcendent, acts naturally and not supernaturally. And this precludes the traditional understanding of Torah min hashamayim. So that's one issue that comes to the fore in this debate. How do we understand God? Do we have to understand God through the lens of rationalism? Or can we understand that God actually has a real interest in relating to human beings, and therefore the way the event of Har Sinai, Torah of God's revelation at Har Sinai, as is recorded in Exodus and in Sefer Shemot and Sefer Bamidbar and Sefer Dvarim, can be accepted in its literal rendering. Okay, so that's one issue. Now, a second issue, it's not just the agent of revelation, in other words, God revealing in an unmediated way that becomes problematic. It's also the content of revelation. And here it's not rationalism, it's more historical analysis, another tool that modern thought, culture, and philosophy has valorized and sees as a way of getting at truth. And if we use the tools of academic historical scholarship, if that's the historical analysis of a text into its source, trying to understand the text in its historical context. And also related fields like archaeology, according to biblical scholars, all of these tools lead us to two central conclusions that become that make again the belief in Torah minas shamayim as difficult to accept. Firstly, if we study the Bible through the perspective of historical scholarship, we see, the claim is, that the Bible is embedded within its Near Eastern cultural context. Okay? It's a text of its time, in other words. It's very influenced by Near Eastern law, Near Eastern theology, and other aspects of the historical background in which it emerged. Secondly, and even more problematic, is that historical biblical scholarship has tried to show that the text is composed of multiple sources, that it was composed in different stages by different authors, and there was a final redactor who put the text together. Now, obviously, these two conclusions lead us to the belief that the text was not divinely revealed, but was actually humanly authored. It's a human composition, and obviously that's in deep conflict with the whole logic of Torah min hashamayim. Torah is from heaven. It has a divine source. So these are the two major problems. In other words, a rational conception of God, which seems to conflict with a supernatural conception of God revealing the Torah to human beings, God appearing to human beings, God descending to Mount Sinai, and also the actual product of revelation, the text of the Torah, and which historical scholarship claims that it is a human text and not divinely authored. Okay, so those are the two challenges, deep challenges to our belief in Torah min hashamayim. Now, in response to these challenges, there are three different options that Jewish thinkers have taken. Okay, the first, and this is actually not taken by either Kaplan or Heschel, is that despite these objections, we must nevertheless accept the traditional belief in Torah min hashamayim. We must accept that the Torah, the province of the Torah, is divine. God, according to this belief, God literally dictates to Moses, word for word, the Torah text. Okay, Moses ascends to the heavens, and God speaks to him. He transmits language. He transmits sentences, propositions, narratives, and Moses faithfully records this dictation. Moses is relatively passive here. He's a stenographer. He doesn't contribute any way, in any substantive way, to the text of the Torah. And for example, a sophisticated theologian like Rabbi Norman Lamb, who's an important modern Orthodox thinker, he insists in this understanding of Torah min hashamayim. And it's important to understand the logic here, because there's the logic here is, I think it's an important claim, is that if we compromise in our belief in Torah min hashamayim, then we neutralize the divinity, the sacredness, and as a result, the authority of the Torah. In other words, the authority of the Torah is grounded in its divine source. The Torah contains God's wisdom and God's will. And if we want to retain the authority of halakha, of Jewish law, of Jewish faith, then we have no real option but retaining our traditional belief in Torah min hashamayim. Okay, so that's one option here. But there are other Jewish thinkers who've taken a completely opposite approach, and they argue that we must be more flexible regarding attributing a divine source to the Torah. And we have to understand the event of God's revelation at Sinai in a more non-literal way. And this idea of revelation still retains a notion that somehow God is involved in the text of the Torah, but in a far more indirect manner. Okay? And the logic here is that if we force Jews, modern Jews, to choose between their modern beliefs, their commitment to modern science, historical investigation, and rationalism, if you pit that against Jewish faith, then modern Jews as a whole will generally prefer to uphold their beliefs in modern culture, philosophy, and science, and forgo traditional beliefs. And widespread secularism and liberalism among Jews attest to this. And an example of a modern thinker who takes this path is Mordechai Kaplan. Okay, just for those who are not aware of Kaplan, he's one of the most important American Jewish thinkers and religious leaders. He was a professor at the Jewish Theological Seminary. He wrote one of the most significant works in modern Jewish philosophy, Judaism as a Civilization. It was written in the 1930s. It's a classic of modern Jewish thought. And he began his career actually as an Orthodox rabbi. He was a musmach of Yeshiva University, and he had a couple of pulpits in modern Orthodox synagogues. But he leaves the Orthodox fold exactly for this reason, because he believes that we have to reconstruct. He founds the Reconstructionist movement, and Reconstruction is the transformation of traditional Jewish beliefs, and that Orthodox dogma is no longer operative because we internalize and accept all of these modern beliefs. So, and particularly, he rejects supernaturalism. Okay, a natural conception of God, that God is transcendent, that he speaks to human beings, that he to them laws. And instead, he views God as some cosmic immanent force within the universe. Okay, let's see how this plays out in terms of his view of revelation. I'm going to look at one short text of Kaplan. All right. This is from one of his more popular books. Does anyone see it?
No, we cannot see your screen.
Okay, let me see what I did wrong. Let me try that again. Okay. For some reason, it's telling my PowerPoint is invalid. Okay, so I'll read you the text. You would think after 2 years of teaching on Zoom, I would have gotten the hang of this, but okay. So here's the Kaplan's text, and it's from, and I'll send it. I'll send to Michal and to Karen the PowerPoint so you could see the text inside after the lecture. And it's from his work, Know How to Answer. And he argues here, when our forefathers declared an idea to be revealed, it was because they were convinced in light of their faith in God and of their conception of him that the idea was somehow related to God's purpose in having created them and to the fulfillment of their destiny as individuals, as Jews and as human beings. We today who look upon God as the power that prods man to become fully human must regard as revealed any idea that helps individuals and groups to achieve their full stature of their humanity. I want to read that sentence again because that one sentence is the key here. We today who look upon God as the power that prods man to become fully human must regard as revealed any idea that helps individuals and groups to achieve their full stature of their humanity. So what he means here is that God is this immanent force within our world. Okay, it's this cosmic force. No, it's not personal in any way. And it's a force, it's a natural force that brings the world to be better. It's a force of progress. And Kaplan was relatively optimistic in this sense. And it brings human beings towards self-fulfillment. And in particular, it brings groups to advance human society. And therefore, human beings who produce canonical texts and establish religions, and religions that are a tool for meeting the spiritual needs of human beings, they become a vessel of God's revelation. But God's revelation here is not God being active and negating humans' autonomy and creativity and initiative. The opposite. For Kaplan, God's creativity is an expression of God's revelation. And it's the human being who's the more active and the immediate force here. So when a human being composes a text, and it's not that God transmitted to that human being the text. There's a certain element of divine inspiration, but there isn't divine revelation in the traditional sense, but the wisdom that the human being produces. And again, this is a way of bringing about spiritual human fulfillment, that becomes the revelation. Okay, so obviously Kaplan denies the facticity, the actual event that God descended to Mount Sinai and transmitted to Moses, and Moses transcribed the Torah. It's a product of Moses. It might be a product of other human beings. It's a text that reflects divine wisdom and to a certain degree divine will, but in a very, very indirect way. Okay, so that's Kaplan's very different, very untraditional understanding of revelation. Now, there's an intermediate view, and it has pre-modern texts that express this view, and it's been argued by modern Jewish philosophers, particularly Franz Rosenzweig and Louis Jacobs. But I want to look at the intermediate view as it's been expressed by Heschel. And this intermediate view argues, it's sometimes called the participatory theory of revelation. And it argues that God and human beings act in partnership in producing the Torah text, okay? And Heschel, firstly, Heschel is very, very different than Kaplan. They had this ongoing dialogue and debate in their writings, and Kaplan very much opposed Kaplan's religious naturalism, that he viewed God as working through nature and not being able to go beyond nature. And it very, very much bothered Heschel that Kaplan rejected the notion that God is personal. Heschel's philosophy begins with this idea, and this is the name of one of his most important philosophic texts: God is in search of man. God really seeks out human beings, right? And Heschel thought that the rationalism, starting with Maimonides, that colors Jewish theology was really wrong-headed. We have to get back to the basic biblical conception of God, that God has an interest in engaging human beings. And therefore, revelation is God's turning to human beings. And this happens at Sinai. In other words, Heschel accepts the idea that there is a revelation at Sinai, and God expresses himself, expresses a message. There's content to God's revelation to Moses. But in what way does he differ with Lamb? He argues that God doesn't simply dictate the message, the words, the actual formulation to Moses. Moses doesn't really record the words that are spoken to him. Rather, Moses receives the message from God, and Moses translates it. He articulates it in human language, the message that was transmitted to God. Okay, so Moses isn't just a stenographer, but he has an active role in formulating the prophetic message. Okay? And I'll just read you a couple of sentences from Heschel, from God in Search of Man. Okay? He argues, the words of Scripture are neither identical with nor the eternally adequate rendering of the divine wisdom. As a reflection of his infinite light, the text in its present form is, to speak figuratively, one of endless numbers of possible reflection. The prophets bear witness to an event. The event, okay, and here's the key sentence. The event is divine, but the formulation is done by the individual prophet. According to this conception, the idea is revealed, the expression is coined by the prophet. So he argues that both God and human beings are responsible for the content of revelation. And in here, you have a really interesting conception of the relationship between written Torah and the oral Torah. We usually understand that the oral Torah is the first active interpretation of God's word, that the written Torah reflects exactly, it's an exact rendering without any human component of God's will, wisdom, and words. And then comes the oral Torah and interprets the written Torah. Heschel argues that already the written Torah is the first act of Midrash. Already with the written Torah, human beings are translating and interpreting God's message. Okay? And I'll just end with one of the reasons this is so important for Heschel. Heschel believed that religion is a means and not an end. Okay? That religion is a way of getting at God, and it's a path to God. And he argues that there are different paths, and this has deep implications for Heschel for the relationship between Judaism and Christianity and Judaism and other religions. Heschel believed that all human beings worship the same God, but we have different means of worshiping it. And the canonical text of each religion is a way of each group translating, interpreting, formulating the divine word. And God speaks to each religion, and then each of them interpret it in a different way. So that's why, on the one hand, he deeply rejected Kaplan's naturalism, and he believed that God turns to human beings, reveals to them his message. But on the other hand, he wasn't willing to accept the simple rendering of Torah min hashamayim because he believed that humans have a contribution in formulating this message in a particular way. I see my time is ending, so I wish you all a Chag Sameach, that we should all accept the Torah in each in our own way, that we should participate, like Heschel says, we should participate in Matan Torah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Ari Ackerman. Our next speaker, Dr. Gila Vachman, is the director of Torah Lishma in Tel Aviv and is a lecturer in Talmud and Midrash at the Schechter Institutes of Jewish Studies. In 2018, she published her book, Megillat Ruth, a new Israeli commentary written in Hebrew. Shortly, I will post a link to her book for those who want to challenge themselves with the book in Hebrew. But tonight, she will present to us her talk titled Kindness in the Book of Ruth, Who Was Helping Whom?
Thank you, Karen. Thank you. And hello to everybody. Good evening or good afternoon or good morning, depends where you are. So our learning today will focus on some of the acts of kindness in the book of Ruth, both apparent and hidden ones, as they appear in the verses of the Megillah and in its Midrashim. The matter of kindness, chesed, is perhaps the main theme of this book. Rabbi Zeira, one of the sages at the time of the Talmud, has a nice saying about this matter. He says, Megillah zo, this scroll, does not contain the laws of purity or impurity and not prohibitions or permits. So why was it written? It is to teach you the extent of the good reward for those who perform kindness. ללמדך כמה שכר טוב לגומלי חסדים. This is from Ruth Rabbah, the main midrash about Megillat Ruth. So indeed, the characters of the Megillah do good to each other in various ways.
Gila,
Yeah.
Can you make your presentation in presentation mode, full screen?
You can, but you know what happens when you do that?
What happens?
I just did it. Did it share?
Yep, now we can see it.
It is?
Yep, excellent.
Great. Usually it doesn't work.
Okay.
I'm glad that it works. Okay. So as I said, this Megillah indeed has characters who do good to each other. We all know this, and they do it in various ways, starting from Naomi's daughters-in-law who escort her on her way returning to the land of Judah, Eretz Yehuda, through Ruth, who clings to her mother-in-law and refuses to leave her, taking care of her and ensuring her welfare. And then, of course, Boaz, who helps the poor Moabite girl who came to glean in his fields. And, of course, at the end, the two getting married and carrying blessing to all who surround them. In the next half an hour or so, we will read the verses of the Megillah as well as other compositions which expand it, the Targum and the Midrashim, in order to inspect the deeds of kindness. As I said, both apparent ones, but also the ones that are hidden or hinted in the story of Ruth. The first time, did it switch? Yeah? The first time the word chesed, kindness, is mentioned in the Megillah is in the words of Naomi. She says to her daughters-in-law, go return each woman to her mother's house. And she says, may the Lord do kindness unto you as you performed with the dead and with me. So Naomi pleads her daughters-in-law to return to their family She's grateful for all the years the two were part of her family, and she wishes them that God will grant them for their deeds. In these words, Naomi wishes to clarify that she does not expect them to stay with her. They have already done more than imposed on them. But what kindness, what chesed did Ruth and Orpah do with the dead and with Naomi? The Aramaic Targum of the Megillah provides a detailed answer. I would read the Aramaic, but I guess it's more clear if I read the English translation of the Targum. So according to the Targum, it says, what Naomi says is, may the Lord do kindness unto you, just as you have done unto your deceased husbands, refusing to marry after their death. That's the chesed that Ruth and Orpah did with their dead husbands. And unto me, im hametim ve'imadi, you did chesed both with the dead and with me, says Naomi. What was the chesed with her? Whom you have provided for and sustained. So according to the Targum, the chesed done to Machlon and Kilyon is the grace of loyalty. Orpah and Ruth choose to remain widows and keep faith to their dead husbands. Moreover, they take care of their husband's mother, who was left alone with no family in a foreign land. Later on, as you know, Orpah departs from Naomi while Ruth stays with her. And now, when Ruth comes with Naomi to the city, to the town of Bethlehem, it says here, Vayehi kevo'ana Bethlehem, when they arrived in Bethlehem, vatehom kol ha'ir alehen vatomarna hazot Naomi. The whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The woman said, can this be Naomi? What deed of kindness do we find here? It seems that the atmosphere in this verse is far from the love and care in the previous case. The entrance of Naomi and Ruth to the town of Bethlehem is accompanied with a commotion, perhaps vicious whispering and mocking pointing out. All the women in town gather around Naomi, wondering how great the change she has been through after all these years in Moab. Indeed, the word chesed does not appear in this verse, but the Midrash does find here too an expression of gmilut chasadim. As we find in the Midrash, again, this is Ruth Rabbah, Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachman said, that day was the harvesting of the Omer, Ktsir HaOmer, as it is taught in the Mishnah, in Masechet Menachot. All the adjacent towns would assemble there so that it would be harvested with great fanfare. העיירות הסמוכות לשם היו מתכנסות כדי שיהיה נקצר בעסק גדול. That's one answer. It goes on, it continues. ויש אומרים, איבצן היה משיא את בנותיו. Ivtan was marrying off his daughters that day, and everyone came to show kindness. And another opinion, some say, Boaz's wife died on that day, and all the towns assembled to show kindness. And as all the populace was going to show kindness, Ruth entered with Naomi. So this one departed and that one entered. As we can see, the first answer leans on the words, well, I should first say the question in the background of this description rises from the words vatehom kol ha'ir. How did it happen, the Midrash asks, that the whole town gathered exactly when Naomi and Ruth returned to Moab? So there are three answers given here, as we see, and the three are tightly connected to the plot of the Megillah. So the first answer leans on the words of the end of chapter 1 in the Megillah, Vehema ba'u Bethlehem b'tchilat ktsir seorim. They came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the harvest of the barley, of the seorim. So we know that the harvest of barley started with the mitzvah of the Omer. On the second day of Passover, the first day of Chol HaMoed, when the new barley was harvested in order to bring the Omer offering. The Mishnah says that this was performed in front of a big crowd. All the towns, kol ha'ayarot hasmuchot hayu mitkansot, and this is why all the town was there to greet them. It just happened to be the second day of Pesach. Now, the second answer explains that there was a wedding taking place that day, or even more than one wedding. It is based on a well-known tradition which claims that the judge at the time of Megillat Ruth, we know that the story is taking place B'imei Shvot HaShoftim, and if one would ask which shofet, which judge was at that time, then there's a very known tradition says that the judge at that time was Ivtzan. And the reason for this is Ivtzan, so we are told, is from Beit Lechem. Some even identify Ivtzan with Boaz, saying it's the same person. Anyway, according to this Midrash, Ivtzan was marrying off his daughters. And if you check it up in the book of Judges, he had 30 daughters. So this is a very big wedding. If he was marrying off all his daughters, you can look it up at Judges 12 and see he had a lot of children. Anyway, this could explain the gathering. It was a wedding or more than one wedding. The third answer claims that not a wedding was taking place, but a funeral. It was Boaz's wife who passed away that day. And that is why all the people of the town gathered to participate in her funeral. The superiority of this answer is clear. It creates a wonderful coincidence. Maybe wonderful is not such a good word to use when we speak about a funeral, but very good luck for Ruth, because this is clearing the area for her as the intended bride. So according to the Midrash, also the entrance of the two, of Naomi and Ruth, in Bethlehem is marked as related to Chesed, because we find here the two ultimate deeds of Gmilut Chasadim, Hachnasat Kala and Levayat Hamet. Either this or the other, we see that the entrance of Ruth and Naomi to Bethlehem is in the sign of Gmilut Chasadim. So this is not, of course, explicit in the Megillah, but this is what the Midrash adds to the story. Further on, as we all remember, Ruth attends the field of Boaz, and he too turns out as a man of Chesed, who grants the foreign gleaner a special privilege. Not only is she allowed to join his workers and collect much more crop than customary, he even invites her to eat with them. When Ruth tells about this to her mother-in-law, Naomi says, they speak to each other. She asks her, "Where did you glean today?" And she says, "The name of the man with whom I worked today is Boaz." So Naomi says to her daughter-in-law, "Baruch hu Adonai asher lo azav chasdo et hachayim ve'et hametim. Blessed be he of the Lord who has not failed in his kindness to the living and the dead." So again, we see the word chesed said by Naomi. The words also resemble what she said in the first verse that I showed, only this time in a reverse order, first the living and then the dead, before she said with the dead and with me. But the question is, who is she talking about? Who is the one who didn't fail his kindness? And also, who are the living and the dead? Now, there are two options. It could either be Hashem, Baruch hu Hashem, and Hashem is the one who did not fail his kindness. But it could also be Boaz, because she's speaking about him, the man who told her about Baruch hu asher lo azav chasdo. So the Hebrew grammar makes it possible to see both of them as doing chesed. So if we go to the first option, that Hashem is the one who did not fail his kindness, it could be supported by a parallel in the Bible. There's only one more place in the Bible where we see the combination of the words asher lo azav chasdo. Anyone wants to guess where? Okay, it's in Sefer Bereshit, in the story about the engagement of, or the matchmaking of Rivka to Yitzchak. Here, the servant, sometimes we call him Eliezer, He says in his prayer, "O Lord God of my master Avraham, grant me good fortune this day. Hakrena lefanai hayom va'aseh chesed im Adoni Avraham." It could be translated as deal graciously or do a deed of kindness. But further on, we see that he says, Baruch Adonai Elohei Adoni Avraham asher lo azav chasdo. He did not fail his kindness. So this is the same combination as we saw in Ruth. And the resemblance between these two stories is undeniable, of course, because in both of them, the main issue is matchmaking, a shidduch, right? In both cases, a man meets the bride-to-be by chance, or so it seems, and he asks about her. Who does she belong to? Here, the servant asks, bat mi'at, and in Megillat Ruth, Boaz asks, lemi hana'ara hazot. But what is most important, in both stories, the kindness plays an important role and becomes a crucial consideration in deciding about marriage. So in the story of Rivka, it is clear that the one who has not withheld his kindness is God, who helped Abraham's servant to find a bride for Yitzchak. But what about the words of Naomi? If we go back, what kindness has God done with the dead? What kindness, what chesed are we talking about? So despite the clear resemblance between the two stories, it is more likely that Naomi is not speaking about God here, but about Boaz. Hence, the words asher lo azav chasdo are the continuance of Baruch Hu. Baruch Hu asher lo azav chasdo. The man who is blessed is the man who did not fail his kindness. Unlike her words to her daughters-in-law, where she preceded the dead ones to the live ones, here Naomi is blessing Boaz for his kindness to his living relatives first. Obviously, she means herself and Ruth. And only then does she add the dead. So whom is she referring to? Probably her family members, Elimelech, Machlon, and Kilion, because by helping Naomi and Ruth, Boaz is also showing kindness to their husbands and their father, making sure their memory will not be despised or erased. After all, Boaz is a man of substance, of the family of Elimelech. Ish gibor chayil mimishpachat Elimelech. Perhaps this is also a hint to what is about to happen later when Boaz will perpetuate the name of the deceased. So now we get to a midrash, which gives special attention to the generosity of Boaz, and this is Midrash Vayikra Rabbah. And it dedicates a whole parasha to the matter of tzedakah and gemilut chasadim, but it focuses on Boaz, and I'm not going to read the whole thing because this is too long for the time that we have left. But anyway, you can see that it mentions 4 cases, for example, for biblical example, for those who did chesed or for those who avoided kindness and were rewarded for this. The first one is Avraham, who fed the angels who came to visit him. The seconds are the Ammonites and the Moabites, who did not greet the people of Israel with food. And it's very interesting that Ruth comes from this nation, Moabites, who are known for their unkindness. It only comes to show us how far she went. And there's also the example of Yitro and Moshe, and eventually Boaz and Ruth. So at the end of each part, I didn't bring the whole midrash. There's a limud, a learning of kal v'chomer. What if one who does so gets rewarded? One who does kindness for those who are not in need, who are in need, all the more so. So we find in all 4 cases a very basic kind of kindness. It's very basic kind of giving, and this is food. They all gave or didn't give lechem. So Avraham ze ve'ekcha pat lechem, I would take a bread. And Ammon u'Moav, it says, asher lo kidmu etchem balechem u'vamayim. And Yitro also says to his daughters, krena lo ve'yochal lechem. And Boaz, here we get to the Megillah, says, it says that Boaz said to her, to Ruth, come over here and partake of the meal. G'shi halom ve'achalt min halechem. And then the Midrash says that more than the householder, you tell me Mashe Baal Habayit does for the poor man does for the householder. As Ruth says to Naomi, the man's name whom I helped today is Boaz. She says, Shem Ha'ish Asher Asiti Imo Hayom, Boaz. She does not say who helped me. She says whom I helped. And what we can learn from this, she told Naomi, I have done many good deeds with him for the slice he gave me. הרבה פעולות וטובות פעלתי עמו היום בשביל פרוסה שנתן לי. The Midrash proves this point by being very precise in the words of Ruth. She actually teaches Naomi, and I think she teaches us all, that chesed is always a mutual deed. The one receiving is also giving, and vice versa. This is never a one-way act. One might think of this as a kind of a reward, that things we do in this world are rewarded in the world to come, or we could think of the mental and spiritual effect that this act has on the soul of a giving person. A more explicit act of kindness appears later on in the Megillah, when Boaz and Ruth meet at the threshing floor, and Boaz describes Ruth as someone who did chesed with him. Brucha at la'Adonai biti, heitavt chasdech ha'acharon min harishon. The words, your last deed, chasdech ha'acharon, refer probably to Ruth's proposal. I think she's probably the first or the only case of a woman proposing to a man in the Bible. So the word last here does not mean final, with nothing after it, but something that was done recently. But what was her chesed? What was her first chesed? Chesdech ha'acharon min harishon. Boaz doesn't specify, but we might conclude that he means the same deed he mentioned when they first met, the clinging to Naomi and accompanying her on her way back to Bethlehem. It is worth noticing that the verb to walk, lalechet, levilti lechet, appears in the sentence about the chesed. You have not returned, levilti lechet acharei bechurim, just like he said before about her walking with Naomi. So the Midrash, as always, suggests another possibility of understanding the words of Boaz. And the Midrash is what I brought afterwards about the words, your last deed of kindness is greater than the first. Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak says, a woman prefers a poor young man to an elderly rich man. Well, I don't know, if you follow the gossip columns of the paper, this might not seem to be, you might get a different picture. But in any case, the idea is clear. Ruth's choice of Boaz is not obvious and is taken by him as a deed of kindness. The marriage of Ruth and Boaz, therefore, have an aspect of mutual kindness. The rich landlord agrees to marry the poor foreigner, while the young widow prefers the old man over the younger man. In conclusion, there is a thread of grace drawn through the Megillah. And where we do not find it in the verses, the Midrash comes and fills in the blanks. Kindness is not necessarily an economical matter, and a person who has material wealth might lack and be in need in other ways. No one is always on the giving side, and no one lacks the ability of giving. Because, as the poet says, the Israeli poet Natan Zach, who passed away about 1.5 years ago, he says, we all need kindness. This is a very nice song if you want to check it out on YouTube or something, you might find it the way it is sing. But what I want to say is the idea of kindness, the notion of kindness, is something that we don't always notice. And I want to wish you all not only a Chag Sameach, but also that you would do and notice many deeds of chesed around you and be part of what I think the Megillah is trying to teach us all, to help each other, not only in the material ways. So, Chag Sameach, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Vachman, for your interesting discussion, for your interesting lecture. And now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for coming to our zooming into, excuse me, I'm excited. Thank you so much for joining us for our Zoom Tikkun Shavuot. Additionally, we wanted to thank our 4 engaging speakers, and we hope that you mark your calendars for our next Zoom that will not be for a while. We will only meet again in Rosh Hashanah on September 11th. Save the date, zooming into Rosh Hashanah. And for now, thank you very much to everybody, and Chag Sameach.